All right, we're going to get started this morning, and I want to welcome those of you who've joined our webinar today, The Changing Role of Service Partners in Digital Transformation. I'm really delighted that you could make it, and I'm looking forward to a really interesting fireside chat today. We have a great two people who I'm going to introduce in just a minute. My name is June Bauer, and I'm going to be hosting this webinar with you. And I want to let you know that we are so happy to have you here, and we would really like to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, as Ted and Victoria are talking, there is a Q&A button. You're probably all familiar with it in Zoom now, so please feel free to click on it and write any question you have. If your question isn't addressed during the webinar, it will most certainly be addressed at the end. We'll probably take the majority of the questions at the end. But we'd really like to hear from you. So if something pops up that you want to know about, I absolutely welcome you to write it in the box and send it to us. So our agenda for today, we're going to do some introductions, and then we'll have our fireside chat / discussion. And finally, we'll wrap up with Q&A. So that's what we're going to do. And I want to start by introducing our two very special and amazing fireside chatters. And first is Ted Shadler, who is an analyst at Forrester, and he's in the business of serving business professionals. He has 33 years of experience in the technology industry where he's analyzed the effects of disruptive technologies on business and customer experiences, and there have certainly been plenty of those over the past 33 years. His research focuses on digital transformation, commerce, and digital experience service providers, as well as the future of services. Ted has also written 2 books, which is amazing. The first one is The Mobile Mind Shift, Engineer Your Business to Win in the Mobile Moment. And the second is Unleash Your Employees, Energize Your Customers, and Transform Your Business. And I have to say that I went to check them out online, and they are both very positively reviewed. And you can definitely get them at Amazon. If you choose another vendor to buy them from, please do. They're available broadly and, very apropos what we're talking about today. So check them out. So that's Ted's background. We're so excited to have Ted here. And then we've got another amazing person. So I don't know how many of you have watched on Netflix, The Queen's Gambit. It's all about chess, and it's about a young woman who starts playing chess very early and becomes a chess grandmaster. And I have to say that we have one with us today, Victoria. So Victoria grew up in Lithuania, where she was the women's chess champion and a national chess master. That was in 1988, which that same year, she won the prestigious Russian National Junior Mathematical Competition. So I would say she's pretty smart. She also studied computer science at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, where she, had her first experience in the United States. Also worked at the Ford Motor Company and at Sun Microsystems. Victoria has gone on from that auspicious beginning in chess and mathematics to found a company, Grid Dynamics, in 2006, where her goal was to, bring large enterprises, bring new ideas, open source, cloud and big data, as well as AI to large enterprises. And under her leadership, Grid Dynamics became a really successful, fast-growing engineering IT services company. She led the business into many sectors, including retail, finance, and technology. And currently, her role at Grid Dynamics, which, by the way, went public last March, I believe, her current role is the EVP of Customer Success. So we have 2 people that have amazing backgrounds today, and I can honestly say, knowing them both, that they are also really great and nice people. So I'm expecting a lovely conversation today. So let me, by way of introduction, tell you what we're going to cover, what our themes are for today. And I I chose this picture of a roller coaster because I think right now, so many things weirdly are accelerating. On one hand, we're stuck in our offices, not moving at home. I say offices, my home office at home, but at the same time, technology seems to be accelerating faster than ever. And, if you think about roller coasters, and I don't know how you feel about them, but I don't like them very much. And you get on it, and it seems like it's going to be fun. And then it can feel very scary. And I think, innovation and the acceleration of it can be exciting, but it can also feel kind of scary as things are moving faster and faster. So we're going to want to talk about that and talk about why it's moving faster and what the risks are, and then what the opportunities are as well. We'll follow that by a discussion around the role of service providers, which is what we promised we would talk to you about today. We'll also talk about how the engagement model between companies and IT and service providers is changing and what the opportunities are for you there. And finally, we're going to wrap up with a discussion on teamwork during the pandemic, because when you work with someone outside your company today, you can't really bring them in to work with your team on site. So what are the best ways to work together so that you get the most out of the relationship? So those are our themes for today. Let's get started. And to do that, I am going to jump out of sharing my document so you can see us all. And I know I did not introduce myself, but I did introduce my name. But I am a marketing person, and I've been doing marketing for many, many years. And I've worked at companies like Apple Computer. I was the vice president of brand marketing at Adobe. I was the vice president of marketing and CMO of WebEx. I've worked at other public companies as the CMO, and also at startups as a CMO. I also worked at a venture capital company called Lightspeed Venture Partners, where I changed their name and created a whole new brand for them and worked with their portfolio companies. So I too have had a lot of experience. I love today working as a consultant with many companies like the amazing Grid Dynamics, and it's a lot of fun for me, and it's great to meet people like you on the webinar. So shall we get started, Ted and Victoria? So
Sounds
Ted,
good.
Good. I have a question for you. My first question. Brace yourself. So we talked about this, the roller coaster imagery. The forces of innovation have never been stronger. So what is going on? What do you see as the major drivers and enablers of this innovation? What's your market perspective?
So look, there's a lot of ways to kind of enter the conversation here. I'll give you a tiny bit of my own context, and then we'll jump right into that question, June. So I actually come from a research family background, General Electric. My father worked for the research lab there. And so the table talk at dinner, Thanksgiving coming up, was always about innovation. Now he worked in materials. He was a materials scientist, as is my sister. And it was always this like, well, we're ready to go. We've got the latest materials. I mean, nanomaterials now, back in the day, it was composite materials for jet engines and things like that. But the tech was there, but the business wasn't always ready to take it on board. And there was always this push me, pull you kind of thing that was happening, where there was enablement, there was readiness to do things sometimes dramatically different because the technology had been developed, but it hadn't been adopted or commercialized yet. And when we got into the software realm, and my background's in software, not chess, although I am enjoying the Queen's Gambit, I just realized that the pace of innovation was going to accelerate, and it has continued to accelerate. If there's one thing that's characterized, my time here on the planet, has been the acceleration of the impact of software on the world. And so what we've got now is basically a foundation for just radically different business models, radically different experiences. And as consumers, we take advantage of that. We get access to that technology pretty readily because it's such a powerful enabler of consumer experiences. So at Forrester, we spent a lot of time looking at consumer and customer experiences to understand that better. And that's a couple of books we wrote were of that nature. But what's happened now is we've got these foundations built, And so the technology is ready, whether it's cloud, whether it's AI and ML, whether it's the ability to componentize software and assemble it more rapidly, whether it's an ability to rapidly build something and try it out, get some feedback on it. These are all enablers that are in place. So the question really is, why is there acceleration, now? And I would say that, stepping back a little bit, the whole realm of digital disruption was where incumbent companies, enterprises, were slow to take on board the new possibilities. And so startups just came in and said, well, we're just going to do it. And often they created radically different business models. That has changed. Not that those aren't still happening, but now the incumbent, the global 2000 enterprises, have the same ability, and now they have the same enthusiasm. So I would say that structurally, digital transformation has been going on and been happening for a number of years, but there were sort of laggards and leaders. And in our data, Forrester's data, 1 in 7 was a leader. But that meant 85% were laggards, and they behaved very differently. So learning from the leaders is something that we'll come back to, I think, as we go through the conversation today. But it got a real jolt with the pandemic. All of a sudden, digital was no longer optional. At every executive level, at every board level, at every C-suite level, there was an understanding that if we are not digital, we are not in business. And that just was a huge accelerant of transformation. And we'll come back and talk about how it's also driven new ways of working. But it's just really, for the first time in my career, technology is not a nice to have. It is seen now as vital by everybody, not just the cool kids, not just by those advanced firms, but by everybody. But that doesn't mean they know how to do it very well. There's still so many things that most companies have to master, or maybe they've got it mastered in a really small place, but they need to master it everywhere across the entire company now. And so when you think about whether it's insurance or health or automotive or energy or utilities or banking or media, all these companies have to figure out how to take advantage of the technology that's been enabled, and they have a huge motivation now to do it. So we've just seen this massive acceleration. I'll say one more thing, because I know there's a lot we can explore here, which is that if you are a company in a sector, in an industry, and you are not doing this, it is a guarantee that somebody else in your industry is. And so all of a sudden, it's not just those little tiny startups you have to worry about. It is your fiercest competitor. Or maybe it's a giant company from another industry that's going to come marching into your industry and take it over. So the fear, as well as the carrot, if you like, the stick and the carrot, are both aligned here to create this massive infusion of innovation and the need to innovate to stay out ahead of what customers need.
Yeah, that is a great description. And it does, I am picturing the roller coaster right now, because it is a sense of excitement and fear at the same time. So Victoria, I know that you work with a lot of super interesting companies, big companies leading in their field, some trying to catch up, but you come with examples of companies that now are having to respond to this force to innovate, as Ted's so well put. So tell us what you've been seeing.
Yes, absolutely. It's so happened, by the way, of also backing into this question from personal experience, is my career has always been around bringing innovation to Fortune 500s. I started my career fairly early at Sun Microsystems, at the dawn of internet computing, at the dawn of Java. And I think I was the very first Java architect at Sun Microsystems back in 1997. Java was like 1.0 turning 1.1, and you could actually do something enterprisey, or sort of enterprisey, with those new things. And I was responsible for driving big production systems written in first and second generation Java for motor company, General Motors. Later became head of fintech for Sun, and was bringing horizontally scalable computing, things that at the time we called computing Google style, because the words like MapReduce or Hadoop or microservices were not coined yet, but those architectures were making its way. And later, when I founded Grid Dynamics on the premise that this new big thing called cloud is coming and happening, and it disrupts everything, a bunch of my clients initially were tech companies. Now, tech companies culturally understand how to wheel in innovation to achieve business results. However, traditional enterprises have always been much less adept at that rate of change, and at essentially monetization technical breakthroughs. And then about 15 years ago, that started to change. And the first industry that in my lifetime, a non-tech industry went tech all the way, was retail. In a way, story of success of Grid Dynamics is a story of riding that development. We became a retail tech company, or retail tech enablement, right around 2009, 2010, and all the way to now. And the reason why I believe retail became the first tech sector from non-tech backgrounds is because the quintessential thread of Amazon. Amazon was a tech company going after retail. And after a while, it became clear for retail companies that either they become tech or they become lunch. Now, fast forward to where we are in 2020, and success of digital retail, learning how to retool themselves, is now a broad-based phenomenon. And every facet of the business, traditional business, not necessarily high-tech business by nature, is in the same dilemma. They will either become high-tech or they simply won't make it on the other end. And so it's very exciting to see these practices taking hold across the board. This is no longer an exception. This is no longer the tip of the iceberg. That is the bottom of the iceberg. And so I want to give you some examples of things that are clearly happening in 2020, probably brought about by the pandemic as the accelerator, but they were brewing for a long time. Take CPG companies, packaged goods companies, which tend to be B2B business. And traditionally, they rely on third-party sales channels to get their products to the customers and to the supply chain to essentially manage inventory and related fields. And then pandemic happens, and their channels get disrupted overnight, both on the supply chain side and on the sales side. And what do? A lot of them, they say, it is actually time for us to do things that we haven't done at scale before. Let's go directly to consumers. Let's set up our e-commerce operations. Let's figure out marketing. Let's figure out how do we do order sourcing and inventory management. And their supply chain get disrupted at the same time. And they say, how do I use latest innovation to be able to arbitrate the supply chain better? And literally within months, we see things, e-commerce infrastructures and supporting operations emerging at the speed which took retailers literally 10 years to create in the previous decade.
Right.
So speaking about acceleration, it's a problem of the same magnitude, but the time frame now got congested from maybe 6, 7, 8 years to equal amount of time and months.
I think it's a great scenario to illuminate what's different. There's a wonderful example of a pharmacy, national pharmacy, and one of them was very kind of digitally oriented. There's two that compete, and another was very kind of all in oriented, but one invested more in the back end enablement, and the other invested more in the front end kind of experience. Well, in the pandemic, it was the one that had invested in the enablement that actually was able to really dramatically accelerate. They had partnerships, they had a way of working, they had core systems in place, they had huge adoption of the cloud, they had a mobile app, they had a loyalty program as this other one did, and they were able to almost turn on a dime. And for example, they were able to identify in their product information management systems which packaging would fit through the drive-through pharma pass-through, because if you had too big a package, it wouldn't fit. So if you had like a box of soap that was this big, it wouldn't fit. But if you had smaller packages of soap, it would. And so this organization was able to respond almost immediately during the lockdown phase to take advantage of the channel they had, which was the drive-through pharmacy, the fact that they were open, and they could really rapidly digitize their entire selling model to order online, pick up in store. And to do that. That was just a phenomenal innovation through ecosystems, because they drew on all their partnerships to do it, that I just thought was a great example of a change. And that change is now structural. They have changed the way they work and prioritize going forward because they learned that it works. Just a really interesting way of thinking about what's possible when people do come together to solve these really hard problems.
Well, it sounds like they prepared themselves to become more agile as an organization.
That was the hard part, because there were believers within the firm in IT, in digital, in customer data management, who knew they had to invest in the core enabling capabilities that would provide then the platforms for agility. We talk a lot about these platforms for agility, which could be a technical platform, it could be a process platform, it could be a partnership platform, where to move quickly, you actually have to have foundations in place. To get started, you can do that very, very readily, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But to accelerate to scale, you actually need to build out the enabling infrastructure, which means those platforms, partnerships, capabilities, agreements, work processes, relationships with providers in order to do that. So there's a lot of hard work that has to happen, and that's not always visible up front, but boy, does it become visible later.
So it sounds like, Ted, and I think Victoria, you were touching on this too, that speed and agility are going to be absolutely critical characteristics of an organization in order for it to be innovative and to be able to innovate, faster than competitors and, make a difference. How do companies, how should they be approaching speed and agility when many of the cultures are not set up to be fast? They're set up to be, careful and mindful of the business, but not necessarily agile and fast. And maybe Victoria, you could touch on that for us.
Yeah, I'll gladly take that. So, in order for businesses to be able to be agile, there has to be enablers. And the really good news is that there are enablers now that have never existed before that makes these things possible. Cloud is foundational, and for a long time, people misunderstood the cloud, I think, as being the cost play, but it's not a cost play. It's first and foremost agility play. It always had been. It's a time to market play.
Right.
It's not the cost of building something. It's the lowest cost of being 1 month late to the market with something, which is dominant. It's about pursuing bigger opportunities faster. If we are looking at plethora of enablers, it's not just foundational cloud, it's the entire open sources ecosystem, it's entire API ecosystem. It's the fact that platforms are becoming available at the literally drop of a pin, of putting the things together, putting components together, inheriting well-working blueprints of sophistication and maturity that had never been available before, without taking away your ability to customize it for your business. But it doesn't stop there. We are looking at aggregation of data that has never been possible at the same scale. And until companies put together massive data lakes and hooked it up to every production of data that they have inside and on the edge of their enterprises and collected the data, which most of them had done or busily doing now, you couldn't make the next step, which is exploit the data. And now from the AI community, from the open source community, from cloud providers communities, come the next wave of innovation, which is now intelligence embedded in models, where you can take somebody's model that is trained on a data which is similar to yours, run your data through that model, and now identify your own insights and be able to make your own business decisions based on it. Just the innovation cycle around that, equivalent of doing something like that just a mere few years ago, were enormously difficult, to the point that was commercial and viable.
Yeah.
And these days, it's becoming very viable. It's becoming somewhat cheap. It's becoming so fast that I can cite a number of projects that's gone from concept to first production in less than 3 months, and then full-time scale in less than 3 months more. Yeah. So that's not an accident. The enablers is there. What companies now need to do is to import, instill, or build out culture and operating practices that can take advantage of all of that.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. And Ted, did you want to add something there?
Well, there's a couple of things that are important here to reinforce what Victoria is saying. The first is the fact that these building blocks are in place, but the ability to put them together you mentioned these architectures, right? This ability, the blueprints, I think you call them. That's a phenomenally important thing to understand. That it's not just the parts; it's putting the parts together to do something new. You also mentioned the kind of the enablement of the intelligence embedded in models and algorithms, and they're now freely tradable, purchasable, trainable right there on Amazon, right there on Azure, right there on GCP. So the enablement that's possible is just phenomenal. And people are competing, providers, data owners, vendors are competing to build the models that you can then train, bring on board and train and use. And so the accelerant is continuing. But in order to take advantage of it, you do need, and we hear this so often, that you actually have to also have a different approach to managing risk. So the old days of managing risk said you spent all your time up front trying to model the risk and mitigate the risk so that you didn't make any mistakes. And we have massive failures on the technical side that resulted from that, where people spent tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars on a system that failed. So that's not where we live today. But you still need a way to think about risk. And so, and Victoria, this is embedded in how you look at the world. So I'm sure it feels very intuitive to you. We find it's not all that intuitive to a CFO or somebody in procurement or somebody in the C-suite, because they're used to this old model for managing risk. You have to be very agile when it comes to managing risk. And what that means practically is you bring the people who think about risk, like compliance and the regulatory and legal, into the conversation relatively early. And then you run a lot of experiments and you test them while the risks are small. And whether it's a failure risk because it doesn't work and a customer hates it, or whether it's a compliance risk because something happened, you didn't realize that data was exposed, you start small. But you need to be assessing that risk of all kinds as you go. So don't wait until it's at scale before you find out there was a risk. You're going to find out early. So then the way you mitigate risk is you manage risk through your process, through the involvement of multiple disciplines, through your agile process, through your test and learn model. And that requires a culture shift. The culture shift has to actually have this other approach to thinking about risk. And I'll just do one link here, and I want to come back to it. When you think about products as opposed to tech projects, that gives you a different way and a different owner for thinking about the potential, the business case, and the risk.
Yeah, that is actually really interesting, and I think great pragmatic advice. I really resonate with the idea of testing and learning and involving multiple disciplines. Those are the things that are going to really help you to be able to manage change and learn quickly. And it is the way high tech works as well. And that is how high tech has been able to manage risk and be so very successful in what they do. So I think that's great advice.
So I want to add, if I may, one piece of it. Speaking back of enablers, we all know how important DevOps and automation is. But I want to put it in this context of risk management. The thing is that the better is your automation, the more adventurous you can allow yourself to be. One of my friends, very smart man, tell this fascinating idea to me. He says the brakes on a car is a speed feature. If you can trust your brakes, you can go very, very fast. But if your brakes are shitty, you have to mitigate that risk by going extremely slowly. This is how, to me, perfect parallel with what automation, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, automated testing, and DevOps is about. These are your brakes that allow you to go very, very fast. If you trust your automation, if you break something, to quickly roll back, not create gigantic failures, and then experiment, find out what works, what doesn't, and do it thousands of times a year, you're going to innovate incredibly quickly. But the precursors to that is that level of automation. Automation is those breaks that allow you not to fear failing something massively. And I think that piece may be intuitively understood and maybe not, but that's the most direct connection I can make between investments in automation and ultimately speed at going at market and being adventurous.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. I love the breaks. I think that is a great example. So let's move on from this topic, which is, I know is fascinating. We could probably spend the entire entire time talking about it, but I'd like to get to what we talked about originally and what the title of the webinar is about, which is that as we're seeing these companies building out their digital platforms, companies that people on our call here, our audience represent, what is the role of service providers? What can it be, and how is it actually changing? And Victoria, since you founded a company that is a service provider, maybe you can start us off here.
I would love to. I think one of the most profound things that are happening in the way companies are thinking about IT and allocating their budgets is this transformation from largely relying on technology providers like IBM, SAP, Microsoft to essentially buy the big box and then integrate that big box into their operation. That was sort of the old model. And what we see digital transformation projects and programs were largely about is sort of replacing this, I'm going to buy somebody's big box mentality to say, I am going to create a set of services out of standard components that are going to ideally match my business. And I'm going to be able to innovate these pieces to essentially as my business models evolve. And as a result, there is an interesting transformation that is deeply affecting the vendor partner role, is that most of the budgets used to go to buying a big expensive enterprise product and then paying system integrators to match that product to my business processes. And now that entire budget goes towards, software is free, it's open source most of the time, cloud infrastructure costs roughly the same that I used to pay for my data center. So now all that budget that I used to pay to big box vendors and system integrators going to pay for engineers that are going to put these systems together. And fundamentally, that leads to mentality that my vendors or service vendors are system integrators, to my service vendors are my engineering partners. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hire a lot of my own FTEs. So there's actually a lot of insourcing going on. And we see a lot of customers wanting to go from 10% internal FTEs, 90% contractors, to something like reverses entirely, maybe 30 or 40% contractors and 60, 70% FTEs, which you cannot do innovation if you don't understand how to do that internally. So then the role of the partner isn't really stringing together somebody's big box. It's really putting together open components to create these technology platforms. So that's sort of one very, very big shift. And so we often need to explain, we needed to explain to companies, to our customers, how is engineering company, which Grid Dynamics is, different from a traditional system integrator, right? And now we don't have to do that anymore. Our clients understand that this is engineering problems and they need to hire engineering companies and they need to build product management culture and they need to build these platforms as digital products that they are going to essentially innovate and improve over time. So that's one very large trend. But there's no question in my mind that there are other things that are very easily identifiable that change in a way customers expect service providers to work with them. It used to be that there were sort of two polar models. One was outsourcing, where the client would say, well, I have this project, I'm going to hire a vendor, it's your responsibility to build it for me. I'm going to give you the spec, please build it for me to that spec. And those models are going away. Customers understand that they cannot be technology owners without also being technology builders, so they don't outsource. The other part of it, all the way on the other side, was outstaffing, where vendor had zero responsibility for building things. Just give me some people, and I'm going to tell these people what to do. And there is very little value in that staff augmentation either. The real meat of the successful relationships now are this interesting collaboration. I think it was Forrester who coined the term agile co-innovation. And I love that term because it describes so well what we do and what customers do with us. It's like customer puts their best people, their best product management practices together, and vendor comes up with architects and accelerators and reference architectures and blueprints and engineers who understand how to implement these blueprints. And then they work together and they learn from each other. And part of it is delivering the products. And part of it is up-leveling customers' culture. And so in the sort of old analogy of, it might be old and we're down about, giving somebody fish to, versus teaching them to fish. But if I may run with it a little bit, I would say that there is sort of three roles that vendors play. One is in a strategic technology consulting role, which is to come in and educate customer about something that we have done many times for others, but they haven't done for themselves yet. So we are expected to provide that technology strategy and teach them how to think about innovation. And there's a fair amount of what we do in that space. That's sort of teaching you how to fish, right? The other big part of the business is really nobody's got enough engineers. They have budgets, but don't have engineers. So it's about scaling the fleet. Customers got a few boats and a few fishermen, but they need 5 times more. So we're bringing more boats, we're bringing more engineers that are in these boats, but then we are working together. It's not like we're doing one thing and they're doing the other. We are part of the same service delivery fabrics. So let's scale the engineering. But then there is a third one, which to me is fascinating, and that is something that is new, and I have not seen this before. And that's about up-leveling the culture and bringing practices that work well for vendors to the customers. And I could think of 2 examples. Our customers want to become stronger. And one of the things that they need to do, they need to hire a lot of good people. So they're coming to us and saying, can you help us get better at hiring? In a way, it might seem like a conflict. Why would I want to help you hire FTEs instead of be dependent on me? But these long-term strategic relationships really don't work transactionally like that. You have to take this long-term view. And so we have customers where we are helping them with technology and people solutions for, let's say, technical interviewing of their personnel. Can we help them get better at this? And when people are coming on board, can we help train them? For example, Grid Dynamics has this program that's been our secret sauce for a long time. We call it Grid U, which is our internal technical university that allows us to deliver over several hundred of technical courses and several dozens learning passes of how to take, let's say, a really strong Java engineer and turn them into big data engineer, or a really good Linux admin and turn them into DevOps engineer. So we have very well-established programs like that, and our customers now are asking us to take that methodology and let them build their own internal university. So this is some examples of types of things that we've I've never seen vendors having to do at the large scale, but I think they're critical differentiation and critical part of these emerging long-term partnerships.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think very helpful as well. And Ted, I know we were talking a little bit earlier about this idea of moving away from project management towards product management. I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking to us a little bit about how best practices are changing in terms of working with partners and what that really means for the people on the call today.
Yeah, well, that's sort of two things bound up into one. And Victoria shared, I think, some really nice practices for helping a customer, helping an enterprise learn how to manage their innovation process, their product development, and their ability to do that at scale through staffing and collaborative work. So when you think about where that comes together, it comes together in places where there's a business budget to solve a customer problem. And in the old days, we would think about that, well, we're going to build a website or we're going to build a mobile app, or we're going to, IoT enable a hotel door, and we're going to treat these as like little one-off, contributions. Now, and this has accelerated tremendously recently, but it's been structurally happening for a while, I'm going to think about the customer experience. How do I engage my customer in the most successful way possible for them and for me? What brings the most benefit to my customer? And what value can I also derive from that relationship? So now, instead of having these project owners, we'll have a product owner that thinks deeply about what the customer wants to do next and how the company can help them solve that problem. Whether it's, think about banking. We've got checking, we've got credit, we've got mortgage, we've got all kinds of banking services, insurance. How do I bring them together to become a financial advisor to my customer? So when I have a product mentality, I put myself in my customer's shoes, I think outside in, and I orient all the resources of the firm. I become the representative of all the resources of the firm and the ecosystem to solve my customer's problem. And that takes a different mentality. That takes a product mentality. So when you think about the automotive industry, the products are the cars. Increasingly, the products are the experiences in the cars. When you think about banking, I just mentioned it. When you think about retail, it's not about stores and websites and no, it's about somebody wanting to do something in their home, needing to learn how to do it, going out to find the parts, maybe find local experts that can help them. That's a product mentality. And when you have a product mentality, you can actually line up, you create a roadmap, you have an architecture, you have a set of building block components, you have relationships with service providers and vendors who can help you, and you apply that over time. So it's not a one and done. It's not a single budget in a single year. It is a commitment to solve a customer problem. Now, true for employee problems, true for supplier, substitute the word customer with any word you want. This is about solving that problem. And so that takes a very different mentality, very different skill set, very different prioritization mechanism. And you need to hire people that can do that. Well, they're hard to find. Turns out the software industry is pretty good at it. So I'm sure that there are plenty of engineers within organizations like Grid Dynamics that could bring that product management and that product engineering capability into, up into the client.
Yeah, that is really interesting. It's a majorly different way of thinking about working. So
and allocating budget and who controls and how do you orchestrate partners, the whole 9 yard changes.
And if I can really, really quickly illustrate that point, the single fastest growing specialization of Grid Dynamics that our customers are demanding are these technical program managers. That are people who are coming off technology, who are having product management expertise, and they're the ones who are looked up as the leaders of these digital transformation programs that are running these captive engineering teams. And it used to be that people thought about project managers and they thought about budgeting IT in terms of projects with certain ROI. And now they understand that there's a 3-year technology development cycle and we're building these core platforms. And it does take a very different mentality and different people, different culture. And it's interesting that this Institute of Product Management, if you will, that used to be something that was internal to Grid, is now increasingly something that customer asks for by name.
yeah, that is interesting. Thanks for adding that, Victoria. That's interesting. Hey, Ted, I want to come back to something else, which is, if a company is going to think about using a service provider to help them this is a very challenging new world in terms of building agility, and through that agility, speed, and being able to move away from this idea of a single software vendor to this collection of resources that become your agile platforms. How do you go about engaging a service provider partner in a way that is aligned with what the goals are, which is really around innovation and agility?
Well, no, those are the mechanisms. The goals are always going to be something that has an outcome, a business outcome, whether it's revenue or maybe you're moving from call center service to customer self-service, so there's always a business metric that's there, a business outcome that's there. That may be hidden from IT in the old world. It needs to be exposed. And one of the big things we've learned in this future of services research is that co-innovation partnerships are critical. So having a relationship that's a long-standing commitment. And then what we call agile at scale, which is basically business agile, that requires alignment around outcomes. And so when I said, this pandemic was an eye-opener and everybody just jumped in and solved problems, that establishes a new way of working, which is to align behind an outcome, whether you're in marketing or you're in business or you're in fulfillment or operations or IT or legal, whatever it happens to be, you come together around a common goal, common purpose. And so you do that internally. You also do that with your partners. You need to have a contract mechanism in place. And this is still building. 38% say they're doing more of this than they were, to have outcomes-based contracting. And that could be milestones. It could be not rev share, but it could be revenue targets or some other key business metric that is agreed to internally and becomes part of the way you negotiate the relationship and manage and co-govern and co-innovate externally with partners. That's a huge shift, because the outcome then cascades down to all of the contributions of all the parts within the company that actually come together to solve that problem. And to do that on an ongoing basis, and to make sure partners are plugged right into that same OKR, objective and key result. So that's the model that's emerging. I'm going to actually, I tell people I'm going to dedicate, my career to it now. I'm going to shift my focus to helping scale that up, make it more attractive and more possible for everybody, because that's when great things happen.
So you're saying, I think what you're saying is that time and materials is not the way to go in these new relationships, but then what is?
Well, look, the actual pricing mechanism is less important than the relationship that is established. And so the way we've characterized, because at the end of the day, you might fall back on time and materials, you have a budget that you allocate, but that's not the real point. The real point is you're aligned around common purpose, common goals. And so to have a co-innovation relationship with a service provider, there's a lot of trust that needs to be established and earned every day. There has to be transparency. What are the objectives? How are we doing against it? Who's doing what? Where are there blockers that both sides need to understand and overcome? And then the value alignment itself is an agreement more than anything else that should ultimately be manifest in a commercial arrangement. But that last step is probably the thing that has most work to do. Those first steps, trust, transparency, and value alignment around common purpose, they're happening today. They just need to happen more often at larger scale with more kinds of service providers. And so that's really where the trend and also the important shift is happening there.
Great, thanks for clarifying. And Victoria, from your point of view as a service provider, how are you seeing this dynamic between client and service provider changing? And are clients driving it? Are you driving it? Or both driving it? What's going on from your perspective?
It's a little bit of both. I think the frustrating part for us is we are often, I think, a little bit ahead of our customers. And one of the dichotomies that often get in the way is that you kind of have two people who are making decision about sourcing. Usually there is a BU that is trying to build a product, and they understand their KPIs very well. It's all about time to market, not per se, price per hour. But then there is usually VMO who is traditionally involved in sourcing decisions, and a lot of, to this day, standard practices of comparing the rate card and picking the one with the cheapest rate for the same line item, let's just say Java engineer, are frankly outdated. And the things that Ted are talking about, how do you actually measure the effectiveness of the partner, isn't something that made its way to majority of corporations. Now, that's not always the case, and we have put together proposals which were aligning on value. For example, one proposal comes to mind. The company wanted to rebuild its search engine. And in the digital world, that's something that is extremely important. They wanted to do it in a super accelerated schedule, which was difficult to pull off. So we've proposed a contract structure. We said, okay, so the actual development is going to cost X. And this is going to be sort of a minimal burn rate for the team that's going to be working on it. But if we can push this farther, or faster, for every month that we beat the conservative launch estimate, there's going to be a bonus. We're going to spend less time working on it, and guess what? We're going to get paid more if we achieve it. And if we're going to start sliding, there's actually penalties. It's all about time to market. Now, we think that these are very compelling type of contract structures for our customers, but we also find that traditional enterprise bureaucracy sort of doesn't really know what to do with concepts like that. And so we are really looking forward to models for how to reward risk-taking, how to reward faster time to market, how to reward things like we got to market fast, but we also got with zero defects and production issues. Now, I think some of it is happening organically because at the end of the day, as a vendor, we are looking for a bigger share of customer wallet. We want to have a right to do more digital programs for them. Every single project stands on its own right, but at the end of that project, at the end of that program, there are more digital programs, right? That we want to get a right to be a partner of. And it's all reputational. And I think smart companies, smart customers understand that. So it may not be embedded in a contract, but there is understanding that if you as a company team up with us on this first series of digital innovation programs, and depending how well you show yourself, what is a track record of achieving business objectives, there's going to be more business. And I could see how quickly the incumbent vendors that were these tier one providers forever, that seem to have all the corporate relationships, typically large, low cost, often Indian outsourcing firms, giants like Infosys and Cognizant and Tatas of the world, that has always been there as a reliable go-to partner, lose footing overnight, or seemingly overnight. And our rise from the very small and boutique firm to take tier one status of the service provider around digital innovation for some of the largest customers wouldn't be possible if it wasn't really based on the fact that they let you work on one program and then they see what happens. And if you sort of kill it, right, then there are so many more programs that you are then allowed to team up with them on that. So I think somewhat, lacking maybe official business process, how you measure effectiveness of your innovation partners, there is still this large mechanism that says, we're going to reward those who can make us successful.
Oh yeah, that's great. And that makes total sense. So I know we're starting to run short on time, and I've gotten a few questions that have come across, and most of them are around the pandemic. And let me see if I can pull them together into one. So people are asking, is now the time to really, start working quickly? And how do I use this pandemic to my advantage in making change and building more agility in my own company where people are to a certain extent feeling risk averse? So Ted, maybe you can kick us off with that one.
Yeah, I'm fond of saying that, last spring, we were our very best selves. People really pulled together to solve customer problems, to solve challenges everywhere, at home, at work, in the community. And so there are lessons learned. And so the real answer to the question, I think, just briefly, is that we need to build on those lessons learned. We need to identify the patterns that worked. We need to maintain those relationships that were perhaps established in a hurry, but created very meaningful change, and then leverage those up, extend those out further. And so I'd say now is a good time. Our data very clearly says we have companies in survival mode, adaptive mode, and growth mode. Growth mode, they're just going. Survival mode, they're actually starting to not just hunker down because they've been doing that, but actually invest in other places. They're investing in digital, as an example. And you see this in hospitality, you see this in airline, you see this in lots of places that have been historically struggling. Retail. In adaptive mode, that's also a place where we had some success. We can have more success as we start to pivot our budgets. I know we're out of time here. Spend in tech is between 3 and say 6% of revenue. That's it. It's almost nothing. The leverage, the power of tech and leveraging the business model up is phenomenal. And companies now realize that if they spend a little more in tech, they can actually save money over there. And so that's why this pandemic can be a real driver of that digital innovation.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that's great. I'm actually going to give Victoria 1 minute for a final word, and then we're going to wrap up. So Victoria, what wisdom do you have to offer us?
Yeah, I'll actually continue on a last question and add my 2 cents into that. And that is, one of the things that pandemic have done is that it put every company to the test of prioritization and meaning. Nobody's got budgets to do everything they want. In the crush time, they don't even have budget to do things that they need. So they have to be crystal clear, what are the things that must have, and sort of everything else must go. And if companies do that right, they emerge stronger because they kind of shed things that were there, by accident or historically, or there were, politically sacred cows. There's no political sacred cows anymore. Business is on a line. So what we see is that while budgets are being cut in general, digital transformation programs are getting more funded than before. At the same time, the rate of success has to be better than before because every project is essential. So we are in this interesting time where experimentation is needed at a much higher scale, but also success rate of that experimentation need to be higher than it was before, which means best practices for how to do that well, at scale, quickly. And this notion of fail fast is not failure, fail fast is a success, because that allows you to test many theories and very quickly zero in on the ones with the best economic impact. That's what's happening with customers that are winning the COVID opportunity. And the test and the opportunity for the service providers is match that intensity, match that philosophy, and bring the best practices. And some of it around product management, and some of it around accelerators and blueprints, and some of it about culture of working with remote teams, something that we've been doing from inception, but our customers have discovered suddenly and in a hard way that getting everybody in open space and hoping that good things happen from collaboration is out the window. So now how do you do collaboration, innovation at scale with 100% remote teams? Having mature blueprints of how to do that, organizational, not just technologically, is what I think now differentiates kind of the winners from losers in the services space.
Great, thanks. I knew you would have some good advice for us to wrap up today. So I want to thank you, Victoria and Ted. Thank you so much for joining us today. I found this conversation not only thought-provoking, but really inspirational. And I am super excited about getting back to work today and into the future. I think we all have a great opportunity now. Sometimes it feels just a little sad sitting at home by yourself. But the reality is, because the world's going digital and the heat is on to take advantage of it, we have a great opportunity, all of us in our jobs, to do more and to really innovate faster. So thank you all so much, our wonderful audience, for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to listen in and give us your questions as well. We're going to be having another webinar and another exciting topic soon. Watch for an email. We'll be letting you know what it is. And we hope you can join us then. But thank you for joining today and have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, June. Thanks, Ted. This was fun.
It was. Thank you so much.
You're all welcome. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.